know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
Is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one.
Let's respectfully disagree, that's what we like
Absolutely.
on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us, GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today. Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Many stories tonight. We'll talk about why the Queen wanted her grandsons to fight in Afghanistan. We'll talk about clean air zones in our cities. Are they really working or just pushing traffic elsewhere? But we'll begin with the story that 19 suspected terrorists are currently living in 4-star hotels, having crossed the English Channel in small dinghies, and that we won't be able to deport them. And I'll be asking the question, when will we wake up? Or do we just head towards disaster? Before all of that, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you, and good evening to you. Our top story on GB News tonight. Police in Northern Ireland have recovered 4 suspected pipe bombs from a cemetery near Londonderry following a public safety operation. The PSNI has called the discovery in Cregan, made just hours before the visit of President Joe Biden from the United States, a further sinister and worrying development. And it follows violent scenes in Londonderry yesterday, where missiles were thrown at police cars during an anti-agreement Republican march. Well, the US president says he's going to use his visit to Northern Ireland to keep the peace, as he said. That was as he left the United States for his 4-day trip. Joe Biden is now airborne on his way to Belfast. He's due to land, we understand, just after 9 o'clock this evening. And tomorrow he'll be marking the 21st anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, when he'll be at Stormont meeting the main political party leaders, as well as travelling to the Republic of Ireland. We'll have full coverage of that, of course, here on GB News. Now, hospital bosses say they're worried about overnight care tonight as they struggle to find cover during the junior doctor strikes in England. Thousands of British Medical Association members have begun 4 days of industrial action today. Downing Street has said it's refusing to hold further talks with the union unless it abandons its 35% pay rise demands and calls off the strikes. Experts warn the walkout could be the most disruptive in the NHS's history, with up to 350,000 appointments and surgeries cancelled. The International Monetary Fund predicts the UK economy won't shrink this year by as much as it originally thought, but it is on track to be the worst performing among the G7 nations. The IMF has upgraded its forecast, saying it expects the UK economy now to contract by just 0.3% this year. That's an improvement of just over half a percentage point from previous estimates. It then projects it will recover by 1% next year. Labour has launched a new advert claiming the Prime Minister is personally responsible for the country's economic woes. The Twitter ad says Rishi Sunak thinks it's all right to raise taxes for working people while his family benefited from a tax loophole. It's the second personal attack on the Prime Minister in as many days in the run-up to May's local elections after Labour accused him of not sending child sex abusers to prison. Both ads have angered MPs, including those within the Labour Party. And winds of up to 60 miles an hour are expected overnight tonight as the UK is set to face unsettled weather over the coming days. A yellow weather warning is in place now for wind and rain until tomorrow, with the Met Office warning people may have to deal with persistent rain. It's said a blast of cold air tomorrow morning could even see an increasing risk of snow over northern parts of the UK. 8 flood alerts remain in place across southern England. Those are the latest news headlines. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and on the TuneIn app. This is the People's Channel. GB News. Time for Farage.
Good evening. Well, don't say I didn't warn you, because when I was going out into the English Channel in May of 2020, I made two big predictions. The first was that vast numbers of people would come into this country, and the second was that it would be a threat to national security. But no one listened, or more accurately, no one wanted to listen. But it seemed pretty obvious to me that large numbers of undocumented males coming in many cases from war zones would be bad news. And of course, we must remember that all of this really started at a European Union level when the boats started crossing the Mediterranean and when the EU decided that their new asylum policy meant that anyone that set foot on EU soil would effectively be allowed to stay, and then Angela Merkel cheered more and more people to come. Our problem is this. The Daily Mail today reveal through a source that there are 19 terror suspects among those who are currently living in four-star hotels at your expense, including over a handful of them who've been under surveillance in their home countries for suspected links with ISIS. I wouldn't be surprised, I really wouldn't be surprised, if 19 wasn't just the tip of the iceberg. After all, ISIS themselves said in 2015 they would use the Mediterranean route to get their operatives into Europe. The worst part of this story, and wherever it's come from, somewhere probably inside the Home Office that's been given to the Daily Mail, the worst part of this story, it seems to me, isn't just that bad people have come in, but that, in the opinion of the person that leaked the story on the Daily Mail, that they won't even be deported because if they went back to countries in which they were suspects, they might get treated very badly. So are we in a position where we're prepared to have people in this country with a high risk of causing terrorist outrages, but we view that as a lower priority than sending them back from whence they came? My question for you, the audience at home tonight, is when will we wake up to this? Give me your thoughts. Farage at gbnews.uk. As I say, I'm not in the least bit surprised. Am I angry about it? Yes, of course I am, but I'm not surprised. Firstly tonight we go to Sir Mark Lyle Grant, former UK Ambassador to the UN and National Security Advisor. Sir Mark, good evening and thank you for joining us on the programme.
Good evening.
Can I ask one very big basic question? You know, you've been involved with national security, international organisations. Does the average Briton, seeing a story like this, have the right to feel very badly let down?
Well, I'm not surprised by the story. I mean, I don't think it's been formally confirmed, but given that there was something like 45,000 migrants coming across the channel in small boats last year, the fact that 19 of them might pose a potential security threat is not at all surprising to me. As you've just mentioned, back in 2015, ISIS were deliberately using the migration crisis to send potential operatives into Europe to cause problems. Now, happily, a lot has changed for the positive since 2015, and actually since sort of 2017, 2018, we've been relatively well protected from terrorist incidents in this country, mercifully, with a lot of potential threats having been thwarted by the intelligence agencies and law enforcement. But unfortunately, we're in a situation now where it is proving very difficult to process quickly and deport those who do not deserve to have political asylum in this country. And that's obviously something that Rishi Sunak, the Conservative government's been very exercised about and is trying to do something about with the illegal migration bill. But of course, that faces a lot of legal and parliamentary challenges before it is enacted.
But isn't the real problem here, and I've seen this for myself out there on the 12-mile line, isn't the real problem here that many of these young men throw their documents and their iPhones into the sea, and actually it's a devil of a job to identify who they really are?
Absolutely, and many of them pretend to come from countries from which they don't actually come. And it's difficult to identify that and find out exactly who they are. I mean, that has been a challenge for many years for Border Force and the Home Office. But of course, all people who arrive in this country illegally, they are fingerprinted. And the reason that one can say that there are potentially these 19 people is because one can track those fingerprints against different international databases. And therefore, you get some idea of who these people might be. It could be the tip of the iceberg, but I think this sounds like, to me, a sort of number that one might expect, given, as I say, 45,000 people arrived this way just last year.
Well, it's 19 too many as far as I'm concerned, but you were there. You were working on our behalf at the United Nations, and of course, back in 1951, we drew up a definition of who should or should not qualify as a refugee. That seems to have extended massively to people coming from any area that's affected by war, even those coming from extreme forms of poverty. Is it time to redefine who might qualify as a refugee and get it back to the basic principles that it was men and women in fear of their lives, in fear of their liberty, because of their thoughts, their views, their associations?
Absolutely. I think there is a need to look again at the convention and how it operates, but there's a number of issues here. I remember I served in Pakistan, Nigel, back in the 1980s, and many people from Pakistan came to the UK and claimed political asylum. And I was asked, as a member of the embassy in Islamabad, to say, would these people really be persecuted if they were returned to Pakistan? And in many cases, what I found was that no one had really heard of them in Pakistan, and so they probably weren't at risk when they left Pakistan. But then they came to the UK and they jumped up and down outside the embassy in London saying death to Zia, who was the president and the dictator at the time. And of course, that did bring them to the attention of the authorities in Pakistan. So that was one particular sort of problem. Another problem is that the convention was based on the idea that once you reached the first safe haven, the first safe country, you should apply for asylum then. And I think the frustration of many people in this country about the particular small boats coming across the channel is they're manifestly not coming from a dangerous country, they're coming from France. But instead of applying for asylum in France, they come to the UK, maybe because they've got relatives or they speak English and not French, a number of reasons. Maybe it's our benefit system. You know, there may be a number of different reasons, but the reality is they're leaving a country where they are safe and coming to the United Kingdom and claiming asylum. And I think it's that aspect of the 1951 convention that people find very frustrating.
I think they're very wise words, Sir Mark, and thank you for joining us this evening. Now, if bad people come, can we deport them? How on earth do we get around this problem of the ECHR and indeed much of the British judiciary? Well, Paul Turner is head of chambers and barrister at Imperium Chambers. Overwhelmingly, public opinion is going to say, when it sees a headline like this in the Mail, let's boot them out of the country. But it seems, Paul Turner, we're not able to.
Indeed, and you said at the beginning a couple of things that I would agree with. That firstly, that there was going to be an influx of people through small boats, and secondly, nobody was going to get rid of them. But there are a number of reasons why. I mean, we know where these people are coming from, France. And prior to Brexit, they could have been returned to France
only
under the Dublin...
Only if they'd previously claimed asylum and the numbers sent back were minute.
That's a failing of the government. Well,
it's all a failing of the government,
but the Dublin Convention provided that if you could establish... They didn't have to claim asylum in France. They could be returned under the Immigration Act and under the Dublin Convention to the country from which they came, and that was enshrined in the 3 Dublin Conventions. But when the Brexit negotiations were concluded, someone rather dropped the ball on that one, because it would be easy enough, and I know you've advocated it, turning the boats around and sending them back to France, and they could have been processed back in France and had their claims dealt with there. The issue of stop the boats is it's a 3-word slogan. It's one that I wonder if this government will hold up to with the hands, face, space slogan, where it turned out that they weren't really doing it themselves.
Yeah, quite.
Because the fact is, when I started doing immigration, which was about 25 years ago, working for the government, there were about 100,000 migrants arriving, but they were coming via lorries, they were coming via aeroplanes, and as former ambassador was saying, there would be a lot of terrorists that are arriving. The point that you raise, which is, how do we get rid of them? It's difficult. It's impossible to remove them as per the Refugee Convention.
But how? Okay, well, it was very interesting to hear Sir Mark saying
there are 2 things. I think
that he thought the Refugee Convention should be updated.
I don't think there is a need to update it. The Refugee Convention
under ECHR. Under ECHR, ECHR is at the absolute nub of this.
I agree.
Is it your professional opinion that it would be easier to deport people if we were not part of the ECHR?
If we were not part of the ECHR, we could deport pretty much everybody that would otherwise qualify for refugee status, because the 2 are coterminous.
Yes.
And so we could pretty much deport everybody. And the problem is, and these people are, I'll come to this point, the problem is that 75% of the people that claimed asylum were effectively recognised, I think, in the last year before coronavirus, as being refugees. Now,
yeah, which is actually what we do, because we can't send them anywhere.
Well, no, that's because in law they're entitled to it, because they're at fear on the basis of their either race, religion, ethnicity, or sexuality. What's left is, and the people that you're talking about, is obviously the unsavoury characters. And we've had unsavoury characters. There was a case of Chilau, which was a very famous case many years ago, where the government just couldn't remove the person because of Article 3. So the House of Lords discussed this matter back in 2002, I think, and they came to the conclusion that removing people such as these people who shouldn't be here would not necessarily make the United Kingdom a safer place, because if they're in the United Kingdom, they can be monitored.
Oh, I don't buy into any of that old nonsense.
The security services do.
Well, I don't know. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. I don't want them here.
Yeah, but neither do I, Nigel. But if you think about it, if they're in the United Kingdom and they're forced to live in a house and they're not allowed the internet, then there's some modicum of control. But if they're sent back to Iraq and back to the gunpowder factory, as it were, they've got no control over them at all.
I'd rather take that chance. But, Paul, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on GB News. It is a deeply, deeply frustrating issue, as indeed is the fact that pub closures are up 60% so far this year. Yes, it's energy bills and many other things. What can be done? We'll debate that in just a moment.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today. Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my common sense crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So some of your thoughts on the 19 suspected terrorists that are now living it up in 4-star hotels. I asked the question, when will we wake up? Louise says an awful lot of us have already woken up. I think, actually, Louise, out there in the general public, that's true. I'm just not so sure, Westminster, that it's really quite the case. John says the obvious solution was to leave the ECHR and follow the Australian model. Too late now. And John, I have to say, you're not alone in thinking this is such an awful situation. It's going to be very, very tough to roll it back. And Stefano says, so the government fails again. Yes, that goes without saying. Now, there is a social change that is going on around this country. It's been going on for some years. There are lots of reasons. The smoking ban didn't help to begin with, but that's a long time ago. But we've now got rising energy prices, rising food costs, and I suspect some changing consumer habits since lockdown. Yes, our pubs are really, really in trouble. And in fact, closures are 60% up so far this year compared with last year. Is there anything that can be done? Well, Greg Mulholland is a former Liberal Democrat member of Parliament and was chair of the Save the Pub parliamentary group. He's now chair of the British Pub Confederation and campaign director for the Campaign for Pubs. And Greg joins me now. Greg, good evening. I have to say, you know, I'm with you. Forget politics here. When it comes to saving the pub, I believe every pub's a parliament and they're vital parts of our social life. These figures are pretty depressing, aren't they?
They are, Nigel. Good evening. And it's not surprising. They're very depressing, but not surprising. And indeed, the Campaign for Pubs, the British Pub Confederation, and all the organisations in the pub sector, the British Beer and Pub Association, who represent the big companies, we're all saying the same thing when it comes to the situation now, with energy bills being at a level that is making otherwise perfectly profitable businesses, perfectly profitable small enterprises that are employing people, that are, you know, really vital for local economies, are not viable because of the level of particularly energy bills. That's the biggest thing. As you've also said, other costs are going up, the costs of the production of beer, of food prices and everything else. So it's a situation, unfortunately, that is actually worse than pubs suffered from the pandemic and the lockdowns. And obviously that was devastating. But there is now a sense, I'm afraid, that the UK government has decided it's going to give all the support it has, and that it will now stand by and watch more and more pubs close, which is a real blow to those local economies and a huge blow to the communities that will find themselves without that pub, because it is such an iconic and important part of communities up and down the country and indeed our culture.
Yes, absolutely. This is about way more than just economics. But the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, in the budget, sort of said to us that he was doing the pubs a really big favour. But how do you view that statement he made about beer taxes not going up in pubs but going up elsewhere? Didn't really help pubs, did it?
No, it didn't. I mean, there was real anger, actually, if you look at the response from people across hospitality, so publicans, but also, you know, restaurateurs, brewers. There was a real sense of anger at just how out of touch the Chancellor and the government are on this. That was something that will do really very, very little, virtually nothing significant for pubs. It's not a bad thing in itself, clearly, but what pubs need is help to become profitable, when the only thing stopping them are these utterly artificially high energy prices. And the government didn't listen, and the energy discount scheme, which was, you know, not as generous as we would have liked, but was nonetheless hugely important, vital to getting pubs through the winter, has of course now just stopped. So the estimate is that the average pub bill will go up over £18,000 now this year. Just you know, think about that sum for pubs, and you know, people are already having to take the decision to give the keys back if they rent a pub, or if they own a pub, to potentially tell the community that they just can't make it work. And that's heartbreaking, because, you know, let's hope in a year's time things are better. Let's hope, you know, please God, that the situation in Ukraine improves and that, you know, the world is looking a slightly brighter place. But to have these,
well, I'd love to see that. Yeah.
Closing because of the situation now is so, in our view, so short-sighted, when they just need some support to get through this next year.
Is it possible? Final thought on this: is it possible, and perhaps the pandemic and lockdown accelerated this, but there is Quite a big social change going on out there. A lot of young people in Britain now not drinking alcohol at all, and kind of going to the pub. Perhaps we're seeing a cultural change here too that can't be reversed.
Well, I think it's hard to say, you know, is it because pubs are closing that people aren't going, or is it because people aren't going that some pubs are closing? You know, these things all change, but the pub has adapted. It's centuries old, and pubs have always adapted. They are still adapting. There are great pubs that have a huge appeal to people across the age range if they offer people what they want. And, you know, they are vitally important to local economies, and they employ younger people. They're crucial for giving people often that first job, that first bit of experience in the working world. So it just would be wrong to have something that is so important to communities, to our culture, closing simply because the government won't give the support they need to get them through what is a crisis. Just like the pandemic was, this is another crisis, and all we're saying is support pubs through this and allow them to then get back on their feet, succeed, and keep running and contributing to their local economies.
Greg Mulholland, keep campaigning for the sake of many of us. Thank you very much indeed for joining us tonight on GB News. In a moment, we'll find out why the Queen wanted both of her grandsons, yes, William and Harry, to go out and fight in Afghanistan. All of that in just a moment.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Did the Queen really want both of her grandsons, William and Harry, to go and fight in the war in Afghanistan. Can this story be true? Well, Duncan Larkham is a former royal editor of The Sun and was in and around this story when it was happening those years back. What was her motivation, if it's true, for wanting both her grandsons to go?
Well, this was the thing. At the time that William and Harry went to Sandhurst to start a military career, there was all the stories of them being mollycoddled and it all being not for real, just for show. Well, of course, now we know, thanks to General Sir Mike Jackson's
this is how this story is broken.
That's absolutely right. He's actually broken royal protocol by revealing these secret conversations he had with the Queen, where she said, well, my grandsons took my shilling, and therefore, if the time comes, they should go to war and fight. So it's an astonishing insight into our Queen, really.
The concept of taking a shilling has a big historical context, doesn't it? Taking the King's shilling when you join the army and all of that. What does it say about the late Queen?
I think it shows that she, I mean, as if we didn't know this already, but she was the real deal. She wasn't about spin and putting forward one public face. She actually knew that if her grandsons, but also her sons when it came to Prince Andrew, if they joined the military and they took the vow to fight for Queen and country, then that's what it meant. And certainly in my experience when I was covering it at The Sun, William and Harry, they not only did work their behinds off to get through Sandhurst, I'd say there was more pressure on them, actually, to perform and to do well, and they threw their heart and soul into it. It was only a certain degree of circumstances that meant that, in the end, of course, as we know, only Harry went to war.
And did two tours, didn't he?
Did 2 tours. I mean, he should have gone to Iraq. He was all set to go to Iraq back in 2007, but then word got out and the plug was pulled. But that wasn't because Harry wasn't a soldier worthy of his position. It was because of the threat to other soldiers if the insurgents suddenly went on a killing spree just because Harry was in town.
Yeah, his position was revealed and all the rest of it.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it does show you, doesn't it, that the Queen believed in duty, in service, in doing the right thing, even if it meant risk.
Absolutely.
And I guess, you know, we might look at those as being old-fashioned values, but I have to say I think they're rather honourable and decent values. I wonder, Duncan Larkham, what she'd have thought, if she was still around, about Harry boasting about his battlefield exploits in Afghanistan.
Well, of course, that admission from Harry in his book got a lot of criticism from a lot of former soldiers, and some of whom that served with Harry. It's not the done thing as member of the military to kind of chalk up your murders or your kills or your whatever you want to call it, depending on which side of the coin you're on. But for Harry, 25 kills in Afghanistan, controversial that he said that. But, I mean, it shows to me, I mean, I'm a big fan of Prince Harry. I really am.
Still?
Yeah, I still am. I still am.
I knew we'd find someone at some point.
No, I am, and I think I took that in the way that it was meant, and that was he was doing a real job. He wasn't in the front line in Afghanistan just for window dressing.
I buy that.
He was actually doing a real job.
I buy that. But
perhaps he went a bit too far in what he said. But
You could argue that for the last 2 years of the Queen's life, he went too far in making life incredibly difficult for her, the rest of her family. So, as a fan of Prince Harry, he hasn't, as we understand it, answered the invitation to come to the coronation on May the 6th.
Nope.
He should have done so by now for a variety of organisational, structural, security reasons. We don't know what backdoor negotiations are going on, whether it's about appearing on the balcony or whatever. But doesn't this just show his level of disrespect?
I think it certainly shows that there is a feeling that you get with Harry that he's just winging it all at the moment and frankly going whichever way the weather takes him. And I think if he was serious about what he said, the ball being in his father's court and wanting to have his father back in his life...
It's all a game, isn't it?
It's coming across as that, and it's very, very hard to defend Harry against any other accusation other than that because, you know, frankly... The King, it's the biggest day of the King's life, his father's life.
Absolutely.
And we still have no idea whether Harry or his family will be anywhere near.
No, I suspect that they might be in the Abbey, but they won't be allowed on the balcony. At least that's what we understand. Final thought on the King, you know, we're a few months in. There are worries that he's becoming a very woke king.
Nigel Farage worries? Or?
Well, look, I want to try and be as publicly loyal as I can. I've disagreed with him openly in the European Parliament in times gone by.
Sure.
I think he's essentially a very good man. I have little doubt about that. But it does seem that opening up the history, opening up the records of the royal family to backtrack on slavery, you know, when the Guardian effectively have bullied them into it, when they themselves have a record. I just wonder whether he's trying to please a crowd that don't support the monarchy anyway.
I think that that's absolutely right. I think that when the Queen died, Prince Charles was buried as well, and he's now King Charles. We're talking about a very different character. And I think at the moment, these subtle signs, can you please all the people all the time? Well, of course you can't. So the question really will be, how will this King Charles actually manage to... I mean, there are some skeletons in the cupboard, if there are, over slavery in the royal family and hundreds of years of history.
Yeah.
Does he do himself any favours by opening up those doors? Time will tell.
I doubt it. I doubt it. Duncan Larkham, great guest to have on these royal issues. Thank you for coming in. And in a moment, in a response to many, many emails from you, the viewers and listeners to this programme, we're going to go down to Cornwall. We're going to find out why this Cornwall Aviation Centre, a heritage centre, is on the verge of being closed down by the local council. Gosh, it was RAF Scampton a couple of weeks ago. Is there no end to this cultural destruction?
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now, 1,000 people crossed the English Channel on boats last week alone, and we've talked about barges, we've talked about former RAF stations, but still, there are hotels being used, and it's now Flintshire in North Wales, where there's a heck of a row at Northup Hall is the name of the residence in the village, and it's 1,500 people that live in that village. It's 400 young men that'll be moved in, and the points that are being made and the emails I've received and we at GB News have received on this is simply that there's only one shop and there's no GP and there's no dentist. But it won't matter because they'll have mobile dentistry units and GPs sent to where they are. And if that doesn't make you angry, I don't know what will. Let's head down to Cornwall. Let's be joined by Richard Spencer-Breeze, founder and director of the Cornwall Aviation Heritage Centre. Now, we've had a lot of emails, Richard, have come into us from people saying you've got a great collection of aeroplanes down there in Newquay and that somehow Cornwall Council have given you very little notice and you're about to be kicked out. So tell us what the truth is, please, and welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Nigel. Well, it's good to have an opportunity to talk about the truth. It's important that we get the story into a good content. We were told our lease was terminating back in October 2021. And so that gave us 15 to 18 months to find a solution. Now, we did work very hard to try and make a solution with Cornwall Council, but we weren't successful. We've been negotiating up until very recently to achieve that solution, and that's fallen flat, even though we'd raised a lot of money and found a site. Because it's fallen flat, we've been given notice to vacate the site, which we're doing at the moment, but it's very, very hard work, and because of the way that it's fallen, it means that there's no hope for our museum to actually go forward in its present form.
And what does that mean? Does that mean giving the aircraft away? Does it mean finding a new site? What does it actually mean for your museum?
Well, it's kind of tragic, really, because we had already found a new site. We just needed the time necessary to relocate to it, and that wasn't available. We raised the funds necessary to relocate to it, but we didn't have the time. It's doubly tragic because this region really, really does deserve a proper aerospace nation, a proper heritage centre. We've discovered over the past 8 years and shown again and again how valuable aviation heritage centres are for inspiring young people and for education into the aviation subject. But Cornwall and Devon and Dorset don't have any other alternative. We were willing to provide that. We're willing to produce our collection for that purpose, but we're not having the opportunity.
Well, Richard, all I can say is I think you're right. I think this is important. It inspires young people. It's important for our history and heritage. I wish you luck in finding a solution. Now, another subject that many of you email us on is, of course, the whole question of how and where we can use our cars and what restrictions are being put on us. And today's particular case study is South Fulham West in London, which is a clean air neighbourhood trial. Well, earlier on today, we sent Christina, one of our reporters, down to have a look at what this actually means in that part of Fulham and what the impact is, positive and negative, on communities and businesses.
Businesses in Fulham say they're losing out as customers face new fines. The Clean Air Neighbourhood Scheme from Hammersmith and Fulham Council stops motorists who are not registered in the area from taking shortcuts on side streets, forcing them to stick to the main roads. 5 cameras have been placed to catch drivers breaking the rules, who now face fines of up to £130. But businesses here along New Kings Road say that they're the ones being affected. They say they weren't properly consulted before the new measures were put in place, and the threat of a hefty fine is stopping potential customers from coming to the high street and their shops.
The businesses have conducted an independent survey themselves, finding that 90% of the businesses are not for the scheme itself, as they're finding it has led to a reduction in their trade and business, and some of them who have been here for longer than we have, which branches 10 years are now looking at closing and moving and relocating to other areas.
There's also concern about whether the scheme even works, as many fear that the increased traffic on the high street is making the pollution worse.
We use very expensive fabric, so the whole thing is about keeping things clean in here, and we just get these particles of, black particles, more of them now. I mean, they've always been there, but now it's just really exacerbated. And this week it's school holiday, so the traffic is reduced, what you're seeing now, but often it's clogged up right from Wandsworth Bridge Road to the traffic lights at Parsons Green Lane, and that's traffic just sitting there.
Some residents have welcomed the cameras as fewer cars drive outside their homes. But earlier today, most people I spoke to were concerned about the effect it's having.
Particularly people who are elderly and who feel that they're really trapped. Nobody feels that they can just pop in anymore.
Hammersmith and Fulham Council started to roll out the new measures in December, but initially were just sending warnings to drivers. A spokesperson from the council said that residents and businesses tell them they're pleased that they're tackling the toxic air crisis after decades of pollution and congestion. They said they also support their vision to make the area a more attractive destination for shoppers and visitors. But with businesses suffering, many are hoping the council will rethink the plans. Christina Curtis for GB News.
Now, we've been debating the ULEZ extension. We're going to talk about this issue as well. Please don't think we're London obsessed. We're not, because Bath has a clean air zone, Birmingham has one, Bradford has one, Bristol has one, Portsmouth has one, Sheffield has one, Tyneside has one, and there are plans for Greater Manchester and all sorts of other cities around the UK, even talk of 15-minute cities in Canterbury, Oxford and elsewhere. But let's start with this one. Oliver Lord joins me, UK head of the Clean Cities campaign. Oliver, no one wants dirty cities, all right? Let's agree on that before we
totally with you on that.
Do anything or go anywhere. But this is brutal, isn't it? I mean, 130 quid if you go off that main road through that part of Fulham. So you want to go and visit your auntie? Well, it's possible after the visit, if you fill something in online, that you might get the fine rescinded. But you are damaging those local businesses, those off-street local businesses in quite a big way. Don't they matter?
Well, I've seen this before a little bit. I've seen businesses carrying coffins down the street, like literally, and then actually the street being revived, about a year later when everything beds in. But I actually, looking at the piece that you just gave us, I actually think things are getting quite complicated now for people. You're seeing local authorities bringing in lots of different schemes. And quite frankly, because they're trying to do something about the air pollution in the city, right? The fact that children's lungs are getting stunted.
This is about anti-car fanaticism. I mean, and ULEZ extension is exactly the same argument. You're taking the ULEZ extension out to rural areas on the outskirts of London with no possible air benefit at all.
Well, we're talking about Hammersmith at the moment.
I know, OK, all right. No, fair enough. I'm talking generally about the approach to cars.
Well, I would say the approach to cars, there needs to be an approach to cars, because cars have ultimately started to overrun our lives, especially in urban areas. And we've been sold a bit of a fallacy, really. We've been sold a fallacy by the car industry. If you watch a car advert, you go to the cinema and watch it, it's like, where are all the other cars in the street when you're selling me this car? Quite frankly, there isn't enough space for all the cars we've got in our cities.
Well, there's the embankment over there.
Something different.
There's the embankment over there, a really important route. 20-mile-an-hour limit, 24 hours a day. Insane, isn't it?
Well, 20 mile an hour is about actually reducing the risk of injury to children and adults. Absolutely.
You want us all wrapped up in cotton wool at home. You don't want us to go out, do you?
Come on. If you get hit by a car at 20 miles an hour compared to getting hit at 50 miles an hour, then the chance of, keeping your life is so much significantly better.
This is a major thoroughfare road. It's not outside a primary school where I might buy the argument about collision speed. I mean, what I'm really getting to, Oliver, is, and I say, we're using London as a case for debate, because that's your sort of expertise, and we're sitting here, but this applies in much of the rest of the country. With the congestion shown, ULEZ extension, low traffic neighbourhoods, this clean air experiment, the complicated, quite right, as you said earlier, that's going on, I think we're getting pretty close to the truth of where we're going with this. Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, earlier on today in an interview with the Financial Times, said road use charging is interesting. If you get rid of the congestion charge, get rid of ULEZ, get rid of road tax, and charge people depending on how many miles they drive, how polluting their vehicle is, what time of the day they're driving, their alternatives related to public transport, and how many people are in the car, that is potentially quite exciting. Well, if you want to live in a Chinese communist state, I suppose it's very exciting, isn't it? I mean, isn't this where we're going? Oh, come on, be honest about it. Ultimately, isn't this where we're going?
That's not surprising, those comments from the mayor. I mean, everyone in sort of the policy wonk sphere are talking about how do we improve things for people driving on the street, because that's kind of what this is about as well. It's about how do we actually charge people fairly for using vehicles, you know, depending on how polluting your vehicle is. If you want to go at peak time, you're going to spend a little bit more money. But actually, the poorer people in society, maybe going to visit their auntie, like you said, once a month, they might be better off as a result of doing a scheme like that, because you're actually balancing out the flat for your vehicle excise duty with actually a more variable
and with
charge.
Cameras, you'll tell how many people are in the car. Will you monitor our conversations as well?
You don't necessarily need cameras. You can actually put some kit in the car itself.
I don't like
a lot
it.
Of insurance companies are doing
I
that
don't
now.
like it, Oliver. It's the big state. But hey, thank you for coming in and joining us in Healthy Debate. Now, we said yesterday we'd try a new experiment. You could video in questions. Here's our first go at it. I've no idea what Steve in Manchester is going to ask. He pre-recorded this a moment ago. Let's give it a go.
Hi, Nigel. It's Steve from Manchester. Quick question. My missus is a massive fan of yours, big admirer of you and your calves. And she can't believe the size of them. She says he must be bigger than Jack Grealish's, the Manchester City superstar who cost £100 million. Two questions. What sort of standard of football did you play? And what would you be worth on the transfer market now? Thanks, Nigel.
Well, Steve from Manchester, it's an incredibly personal question to ask about the size of my calves. I have to be honest with you, they are not exactly even. One is massively overdeveloped, and the other, because I was actually hit by a car that was doing about 25 miles an hour and survived it, is much smaller than the other. If both calves were like my right calves, then you're quite right. I might make, had I been younger, a very good replacement for Jack Grealish. Sadly, that is not to be, but I'm pleased the tech worked. And to repeat the point, I will go on taking questions from you, which we'll play on screen. Now, Jacob Rees-Mogg joins me now in the studio. Oh, Jacob, 19 suspected terrorists living in four-star hotels. What are we going to do?
Well, should we have any of these people in four-star hotels? I mean, the fact that they're terrorists is just the icing on a particularly disagreeable cake.
Yeah.
And this has to be stopped. And
I agree.
We've just got to get control of the small boats. And I hope this latest piece of legislation will do it. But we've got to make it happen, and we mustn't be told what to do by the ECHR.
That's the key. Jacob, what have you got this evening for us?
We're going to be talking to the brilliant Robert Toombs, the history professor, about apologising for slavery when we were the country that stopped it. And that's coming at the end of the programme, but we've got lots before that.
He's terrific. He's also very good at showing how race is being used to divide us, not to unite us. No, brilliant. Brilliant. Jacob, have a great show. I know you will. Let's see what April showers are in store for us tomorrow.
Hello there, good evening. I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Has turned into quite a soggy end to Tuesday for many of us, and low pressure is going to stay with us over the next few days. It's been bringing these weather fronts into western areas of the UK, and they're slowly pushing their way eastwards as we head throughout the rest of this evening and overnight, bringing rain to much of eastern England and up into Scotland. Some heavier bursts possible, particularly across Dumfries and Galloway. Gales across eastern coastal areas of Scotland, and the rain will be falling as snow over the Grampians as well. Some clearer spells developing for England and Wales later on in the night, but that will allow temperatures to drop off down into those mid-low single figures. So quite a chilly start to Wednesday morning. Again, some showers in the west, potential for some snow over the Pennines and higher ground of Erie as well. We then get this second pulse of rain moving back into Northern Ireland, Wales, southwest England throughout Wednesday. That will be accompanied by Further strong winds, the risk of gales, severe along coastlines, 60-mile-an-hour gusts possible. So do take care, because there could be some travel disruption and large waves. Temperatures quite disappointing, ranging between 9-10 degrees Celsius, but probably feeling closer to 2 or 4 degrees when you are exposed to that wind. Showers continuing, particularly across the northern half of the UK throughout Wednesday night, generally easing off a bit more across Wales, central southern areas of England. But again, those clear spells will allow